I came home from work on a Tuesday afternoon to find construction workers pouring concrete through the middle of my garage bay, and nobody had bothered to ask my permission or even give me a courtesy heads-up about it. My name is Henry Vance, and I had lived in the Ridgewood Estates community in Naperville, Illinois for 3 years without major incident. Sure, the HOA had its quirks like most do, but nothing prepared me for what I witnessed that September day. I pulled into my driveway, except I couldn't actually pull all the way in because there were orange cones blocking the entrance to my 3-car garage. 2 men in hard hats were smoothing out fresh concrete that cut directly through where my middle garage bay door normally opened. "Excuse me," I said, stepping out of my sedan and approaching the workers. "What exactly is going on here?" The older of the 2 workers, a man with a weathered face and a thick gray mustache, straightened up and wiped his hands on his jeans. "We're installing the community walkway, buddy. Should be done by tomorrow afternoon." "The what now?" I stared at the concrete path that extended from the street, went up my driveway, cut through my garage bay, continued through my backyard based on the markers I could see, and apparently connected to the walking trail that led to the community park about a quarter mile behind my property. "The walkway. Got the work order right here." He pulled a wrinkled paper from his back pocket and showed me. Sure enough, it had an official HOA letterhead and showed a planned pedestrian pathway that went directly through my property. "Nobody asked me about this," I said, feeling my blood pressure rising. "This is my property. You cannot just build through my garage." The worker shrugged. "Take it up with the HOA, pal. We just go where they tell us. They had all the permits and everything." I immediately pulled out my phone and called the HOA office. A chirpy receptionist answered on the 3rd ring. "Ridgewood Estates, HOA. This is Jenny speaking. This is Henry Vance at 2847 Maple Ridge Drive. There are people pouring concrete through my garage right now, and I need to speak to someone about this immediately." "Oh, yes, Mr. Vance. That would be the new Community Accessibility Walkway project. Let me transfer you to Brenda Patterson, our HOA president." The line clicked and I waited, watching as the workers continued their job like I was not even standing there. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 2 minutes, a woman's voice came on the line. "Mr. Vance, this is Brenda Patterson. How can I help you?" Brenda Patterson was exactly the type of person you would picture running an overzealous HOA. I had met her once at a community meeting. She was in her late 40s, with short blonde hair cut in what my sister always called the "can I speak to the manager" style, and she wore blazers even to casual neighborhood events. Her voice had that particular quality of someone who was used to getting her way and did not appreciate being questioned. "Miss Patterson, there are workers destroying my garage bay right now. They say they are building a walkway, but nobody asked my permission or even informed me this was happening. It was in the monthly newsletter, Mr. Vance, and it was voted on at the last board meeting. I never received notice that my specific property would be affected. You cannot just build through someone's garage." "Actually, Mr. Vance, if you would review your HOA agreement, you would see that the association maintains an easement for community improvements. This walkway is for the betterment of all residents, providing easier access to the park and walking trails. Several elderly residents have complained about having to walk the long way around." "The long way around what? Around my property?" "Precisely. The previous route requires them to walk along Ridgewood Boulevard, which, as you know, has no sidewalk in that section, then turn onto Park Access Road. It adds considerable distance. This new walkway creates a safe, direct route." "Through my garage," I repeated, trying to keep my voice level. "How am I supposed to use that bay? You have 2 other bays, Mr. Vance. I'm sure you can make do. The community's needs must sometimes take precedence over individual convenience. Now, if you will excuse me, I have another call. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there staring at my phone, then at the workers, then at the concrete that was already setting in the afternoon sun. The path was about 4 feet wide and cut right through the center bay of my garage. Even if the door could somehow still open, which it could not because the concrete was raised about 6 inches to match the walking trail standards, anyone using the walkway would be walking directly through my garage space. I went inside my house, grabbed the HOA binder from my office, and started reading through every document. My wife Sarah had always been the one to handle this stuff, but she had passed away from cancer 2 years ago. I had been so focused on just getting through each day that I had not paid much attention to HOA matters. Now I was regretting that. After an hour of reading, I found the easement clause Brenda had mentioned. It was buried in subsection 12.4.7 of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. It stated that the HOA maintained easement rights for utilities and community improvements, deemed necessary by a majority board vote. However, there were specific requirements for notification, and property owners were supposed to receive written notice at least 30 days before any construction began that would directly impact their property use. I checked my mail from the past 2 months. Nothing. I checked my email, including spam folders. Nothing about the walkway construction other than a vague mention in the newsletter that said, "Community accessibility improvements underway," with no specifics about routes or affected properties. The next morning, I went to the HOA office in person. It was located in a small building near the community center, and Brenda was sitting at the main desk when I walked in. She looked up from her computer and gave me a tight smile. "Mr. Vance, I assume you are here about the walkway." "You did not provide proper notification," I said, putting copies of the relevant HOA documents on her desk. "Right here, it says affected property owners must receive written notice 30 days in advance. I received nothing." Brenda barely glanced at the papers. "The newsletter constitutes notice. It mentioned improvements. It did not say you would be building through my garage. That's not adequate notice, and you know it. The plans were available for review here at the office, which means nothing if people do not know they need to come look. You deliberately avoided proper notification because you knew I would object." Brenda's expression hardened. "Mr. Vance, the board voted unanimously on this project. It serves the greater good of the community. Your objections, while noted, do not change the fact that the construction is legal and will continue." "Then I will see you in court," I said. "That is your right," Brenda replied, her tone ice cold. "But I should mention that taking legal action against the HOA could result in additional assessments to cover legal fees, which would come out of your pocket. And you might find that judges tend to side with community improvement projects. But please, waste your money and time if you wish." I left the office furious, but trying to think strategically. Sarah had always been better at this kind of thing. She had been an attorney before she got sick, and she would have known exactly how to handle this situation. I missed her so much in that moment it physically hurt. Over the next few days, the construction continued. They finished the walkway through my garage bay, installed decorative lamp posts along the route, and even put up a small sign at the street entrance that said, "Ridgewood Estates Community Trail dedicated to making our neighborhood more accessible." I contacted 3 different attorneys. 2 told me essentially what Brenda had implied, that fighting an HOA over a properly voted improvement project would be expensive and unlikely to succeed, even with the notification issues. The third attorney was more optimistic, but wanted a $5,000 retainer just to get started, with no guarantees. I spent a week stewing over it, watching neighbors I barely knew walking through my garage bay at all hours. People would peer into my garage at my belongings as they passed through. Some would even wave at me if I was working in there, like this was completely normal. A few teenagers decided the walkway was perfect for skateboarding at night. Dog walkers used it constantly, and not all of them were diligent about cleaning up after their pets. The breaking point came when I found a couple having a full conversation while standing in my garage bay, blocking my car, completely oblivious to the fact that they were on my private property. I had to ask them twice to move so I could back out and get to work. That evening, I sat in my home office, looking at the property survey I had pulled from my files. Then I looked at the county records online, verifying property lines and easement details. I pulled up the original HOA covenants, not just the summary version but the full legal document filed with the county. And I started to smile for the first time in 2 weeks. The easement Brenda kept citing aloud for utilities and community improvements, but it specifically defined the easement area as being limited to the rear 20 feet of all properties bordering the community park space. My property was 150 feet deep. The garage was at the front, only about 30 feet from the front property line. The HOA had assumed the easement covered the entire property, but it did not. Furthermore, when I checked the actual permits that had been filed with the county for the walkway construction, I noticed something interesting. The HOA had filed them under a community improvement project, but they had not actually obtained a construction permit for building on my specific property address. They had used a blanket permit for the community common areas, which my garage bay definitely was not. I took the next day off work and went to the county planning and zoning office in downtown Naperville. I spoke with a clerk who pulled up all the records, and after about an hour of review, she confirmed my suspicions. "Yeah, this is not right," she said, tapping her computer screen. They needed individual permits for construction on each private property parcel. The HOA easement does not override the need for proper building permits, and looking at the easement boundaries, it does not actually extend to the front portion of your lot anyway. "So what are my options?" I asked. "Well, you can file a complaint with the county. We can send an inspector out. If the construction is not properly permitted and is outside the easement area, they will have to remove it." "How long does that process take?" "Could be a few weeks, maybe a month. These things take time." I thanked her and left with copies of all the relevant documents, but I did not file a complaint. Not yet. Because I had a better idea, when I got home, I carefully measured the walkway through my garage bay. Then I went to Home Depot and bought materials. I spent the entire weekend working, and by Monday morning, I had installed a beautiful new wall right down the center of where the walkway cut through my garage. I used proper framing, drywall, insulation, and finished it with paint that matched the rest of the garage. I even added an electrical outlet on each side for good measure. The wall completely blocked the walkway. It went from floor to ceiling, and I anchored it to the concrete foundation with heavy-duty bolts. I also installed a proper garage door on the previously ruined middle bay, boxing the walkway entrance in completely from both sides. Then I put up security cameras covering every angle of my property and a nice sign on my driveway that read, "Private property, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted." It took exactly 3 hours for Brenda Patterson to show up at my door. I had been expecting her. "Mr. Vance, what do you think you are doing?" She was practically vibrating with rage, her face flushed red. "Restoring my garage to its intended use," I said calmly. Was there something you needed? You have blocked the community walkway. I have walled off the interior of my private garage, which is my right as a property owner. That is community property now. You cannot just block an HOA improvement. Actually, Brenda, I can. I handed her a folder with copies of all the documents I had gathered. The HOA easement on my property only covers the rear 20 feet, not the front where my garage is located. And the construction was never properly permitted through the county for private property work. So that walkway through my garage was always illegal. Brenda's face went from red to purple. The board approved this. The board does not have the authority to override county building codes or construct outside the legal easement boundaries. You can check with your attorney if you would like, but I already confirmed it all with the county planning office. You are going to remove that wall, or I will have the HOA take legal action. Please do. I would love to see you explain to a judge why the HOA built an unpermitted structure on private property outside the easement area. I have documentation of everything, including the fact that you never provided proper notification as required by the HOA's own rules. Brenda snatched the folder from my hands and stormed off without another word. I watched her get into her white BMW SUV and speed away fast enough to leave rubber marks on the street. An hour later, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. It turned out to be Martin Wheeler, the HOA's attorney. He was significantly more reasonable than Brenda. Mr. Vance, I have been apprised of the situation with the walkway. I have also reviewed the documents you provided to Miss Patterson. I need to be candid with you. The HOA may have overstepped here. May have, I said. Okay, did overstep. The construction should not have proceeded without proper individual permits, and the easement boundaries should have been verified before the project began. However, the walkway is already built. Removing it would be expensive and would anger many residents who are now using it regularly. Not my problem, I said. The HOA should have done their homework before building through my garage. What would it take to resolve this amicably? Wheeler asked. Is there a financial settlement that would make you comfortable with keeping the walkway? No amount of money makes me comfortable with strangers walking through my garage at all hours. This is my home. My wife and I bought this house together. She died in this house. I have exactly zero interest in having it turned into a public thoroughfare for the convenience of people too lazy to walk an extra few minutes. There was a long pause on the line. I understand. For what it is worth, I am sorry for your loss. And I think Miss Patterson handled this entire situation poorly. Let me speak with the board and see what can be done. That was on a Monday. By Wednesday, nothing had changed except that I noticed some residents trying to use the walkway and being confused when they found it blocked. A few people knocked on my door to ask what happened, and I politely explained that the walkway had been illegally constructed without proper permits or notification. Most people seemed understanding, though a few huffed about the inconvenience. On Thursday, I received a certified letter from the HOA demanding that I remove the wall immediately or face daily fines of $200 for violation of HOA rules. I called Martin Wheeler. Did you authorize this fine? I asked him. No, I did not. That was all Brenda. I told her it was a bad idea, but she insisted. Tell her I said to bring it on. I will file a counterclaim for the damage to my property, failure to provide proper notification, and emotional distress. And I will make sure the local news knows that the HOA is fining a widower for repairing his garage after they illegally built through it. Wheeler sighed heavily. Let me try to talk some sense into her. But Brenda Patterson was not interested in sense. She doubled down. The next week, I received notification that my HOA dues were being increased by an additional $500 per month to cover legal fees and community maintenance. I was also banned from using the community pool, tennis courts, and gym until the dispute was resolved. I consulted with a real estate attorney named Thomas Brennan, who came highly recommended. After reviewing everything, he agreed to take my case on contingency. "This is pretty clear-cut," Brennan said. "The HOA screwed up badly. The question is whether you want to push for the walkway to be completely removed or just diverted around your property." "I want it off my property entirely," I said. "They had no right to do this." "Then that is what we will demand." We filed suit against the HOA in DuPage County Circuit Court. We asked for the walkway section on my property to be removed, all fines to be waived, compensation for damages to my property, and the cost of repairs I had made, and attorney's fees. We also filed a complaint with the county about the unpermitted construction. The county inspector came out the following week. He was a middle-aged man named Rodriguez who took his job seriously. He measured everything, took photos, reviewed the permits, and shook his head. "Yeah, this is not good," he said. They definitely needed individual permits for each affected property, and this is clearly outside the platted easement area. I am going to have to issue a violation notice to the HOA. They will need to either obtain the proper permits retroactively, which would require your permission, or remove the non-compliant sections. "How long do they have?" I asked. "Usually 30 days to come into compliance or submit a remediation plan." The violation notice hit the HOA office like a bomb. Suddenly, the tone of communications changed dramatically. Martin Wheeler called me directly. "Mr. Vance, we need to discuss a settlement. The board is willing to remove the walkway section on your property and pay for restoration of your garage bay to original condition. In exchange, we would ask that you drop the lawsuit and any claims for additional damages." "What about the fines Brenda imposed?" I asked. "All waived and refunded." "And the increased dues?" "Rescinded." "And my attorney's fees?" Wheeler hesitated. "The board authorized me to offer up to $15,000 for your attorney's fees and inconvenience." I discussed it with Brennan, who advised me that it was a reasonable offer given that dragging it through court would take months and success was not guaranteed, despite the strong case. But I was not feeling particularly reasonable. The whole experience had infuriated me in a way I had not felt since Sarah's death. The HOA's complete disregard for my rights, their arrogance in thinking they could just do whatever they wanted, and Brenda's vindictive response when I dared to object all of it, made me want to fight harder. Counter with $50,000, removal of the walkway within 30 days, and written apology from the board to be posted in the community newsletter, I told Brennan. We sent the counter offer. The HOA rejected it, so we proceeded with the lawsuit. Discovery was illuminating. It turned out that several board members had expressed concerns about the easement boundaries and notification requirements before construction began, but Brenda had pushed the project through anyway. She had been personally friendly with one of the elderly residents who complained most about the long walk to the park, and she had made it her mission to solve the problem regardless of the legality. Even more interesting, we discovered that Brenda had a financial interest in the construction company that did the work. Her brother-in-law owned the company, and they had been paid nearly $80,000 for the project, which seemed excessive for what amounted to a relatively simple concrete pathway. When we subpoenaed the financial records, things got really interesting. The walkway project had been budgeted at $40,000. The construction company had charged $80,000, and the extra $40,000 had been invoiced as unexpected complications, and site preparation. But there was no documentation of what those complications were. Brennan smelled blood in the water. I think there might be fraud here. The HOA covenants require competitive bidding for projects over $50,000. Did they get other bids? We requested bid documentation through Discovery. The HOA took forever to respond, and when they finally did, they provided only a single bid from Brenda's brother-in-law's company. No evidence of competitive bidding at all. We need to expand this suit, Brennan said. This is not just about the walkway anymore. This is about HOA board misconduct and potential embezzlement. I agreed. We filed an amended complaint adding claims for breach of fiduciary duty, self-dealing, and violation of the HOA's own procurement policies. The story leaked to the local news. A reporter from the Daily Herald contacted me for comment. I gave her a carefully worded statement about HOAs overstepping their authority and the importance of following proper procedures. She ran a story titled, "Naperville HOA Under Fire After Building Walkway Through Resident's Garage." The article was damning. It included quotes from other residents who had been unhappy with the board's handling of various issues but had been afraid to speak up. It mentioned the lack of competitive bidding and Brenda's relationship to the contractor. It even included a photo of my garage with the walkway running through it, taken before I built the wall. The Daily Herald story got picked up by a local TV station, and suddenly, I had news cameras in my driveway. Brenda refused to comment, which made the HOA look even worse. The community Facebook page exploded with arguments between residents who supported the walkway for its convenience and those who were outraged by the board's misconduct. Within a week, a petition started circulating to recall the entire HOA board. It needed signatures from 30% of homeowners to trigger a special election. It got them in 5 days. Brenda tried to fight back. She sent out a newsletter claiming that I was a troublemaker who was costing the HOA tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees over a minor accommodation. She said the lawsuit was frivolous and that she was defending the community's interests. The strategy backfired spectacularly. More people signed the recall petition. Residents showed up at the next board meeting demanding answers about the finances and the missing competitive bids. Brenda tried to maintain control, but the meeting descended into chaos with people shouting questions and accusations. I did not attend. I figured my presence would just inflame things further. But my neighbor, a retired engineer named Bill Harrison, went and recorded the whole thing on his phone. He sent me the video afterward. It was quite something to watch Brenda try to defend her actions while the room full of angry homeowners demanded accountability. The recall election was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, our lawsuit continued. The HOA's insurance company got involved at this point, and they brought in their own attorney. Insurance companies do not like fraud allegations, and they definitely do not like paying for board misconduct. The insurance attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Hendricks, reached out to Brennan directly. "My client wants to settle this before it gets any worse. What is your number?" We had a settlement conference in Brennan's office. Patricia came with Wheeler and 2 of the board members, but not Brenda. They explained that Brenda had been asked to step down pending an internal investigation, but had refused. "The insurance company will cover the settlement, but we need this resolved quickly," Patricia said. "What will it take?" Brennan laid out our demands. Complete removal of the walkway section on my property within 30 days. Full restoration of my garage bay professionally done. $75,000 to cover my attorney's fees, damages, and emotional distress. A written apology, and most importantly, a complete financial audit of the HOA's dealings with the construction company. The audit is not negotiable, Brennan added. If there was fraud, the community deserves to know, and frankly, if you do not agree to it, we will pursue it through the lawsuit anyway. Patricia conferred with Wheeler and the board members. After 20 minutes of hushed discussion, they agreed to everything except the dollar amount. They offered $45,000. We settled at $60,000 plus all the other terms. The agreement was contingent on Brenda Patterson resigning from the board immediately. 3 days later, Brenda submitted her resignation. The official reason given was to pursue other interests, but everyone knew the truth. The recall election was canceled since the entire board except for one member had agreed to resign and hold new elections within 60 days. The financial audit revealed what we suspected. The construction company had massively overcharged, and Brenda had approved the invoices without question. While they could not prove direct kickbacks, the pattern was clear enough that the HOA filed a claim against their general liability insurance and referred the matter to the DuPage County State's attorney for potential criminal investigation. The walkway section through my property was removed in late November. A professional restoration company came in and repaired the concrete floor of my garage bay, replaced the damaged door track, and repainted everything. They did such a good job you could barely tell anything had happened. But here is where my story takes a turn that I am not entirely proud of, but do not regret either. The walkway still existed on either side of my property. It came from the street, stopped at my property line, then picked up again at my rear property line and continued through my backyard to connect with the community trail. Except now, there was a 150-foot gap where my property sat in the middle. The residents who had gotten used to the convenient shortcut were annoyed. They started cutting through neighboring properties to get around mine, which made those neighbors unhappy. The issue came up at the first meeting of the new HOA board, which consisted entirely of different people than before, including Bill Harrison as president. "What do we do about the walkway situation?" one board member asked. "The easement still exists on the rear section of properties. Can we reroute around the Vance property?" Bill, who had become a friend during the whole ordeal, looked at the maps. "We could connect it to Ridgewood Boulevard and have people walk around on the street sidewalk." "But that is the whole reason the walkway was built in the first place," another member objected. "That section of Ridgewood has no sidewalk and people complained it was dangerous." "Then we would need to petition the village to install sidewalks along that section. Or we could extend the walkway along the rear easement area of properties on the other side of the park," Bill suggested. They commissioned a study of the options. It turned out that getting the village to install sidewalks along Ridgewood Boulevard would take years and require approval from multiple other property owners along that road who were not part of the HOA. Extending the walkway along the other side of the park was possible, but would add significant distance to the route. The most direct alternate route using the existing easements required walkers to go from the street, turn left onto Ridgewood Boulevard, walk 3/10 of a mile along the shoulder where there was no sidewalk, turn right onto Park Access Road, walk another 1/4 mile, then finally access the trail. Total distance, about 9/10 of a mile compared to the 2/10 of a mile the direct route through my property had been. The walk time went from about 5 minutes to about 25 or 30 minutes depending on pace. Some residents blamed me for the inconvenience. I got some nasty notes in my mailbox and a few choice words from neighbors who considered me selfish. But far more people understood and supported my position. Several told me They thought what the old board did was outrageous, and they were glad someone stood up to them. The new board approved the rerouted walkway plan, installing proper signage and reflective markers along the Ridgewood Boulevard section for safety. They also started a campaign to get village approval for sidewalk installation, which was still pending as of late December. Meanwhile, the state's attorney investigation into Brenda Patterson and her brother-in-law's construction company moved forward. In January, about 4 months after the whole mess started, criminal charges were filed. Brenda was charged with theft and official misconduct for her role in awarding the inflated contract without competitive bidding. Her brother-in-law was charged with theft by deception for the fraudulent invoicing. The amounts involved were significant enough to make them felonies. The case wound through the system slowly. I was not directly involved since the HOA itself was the victim of the fraud, but I kept track through public records and occasional updates from Bill Harrison, who had to deal with the aftermath as the new board president. In March, Brenda's brother-in-law took a plea deal. He agreed to testify against Brenda in exchange for reduced charges and probation plus restitution. He admitted that they had an arrangement where he would overcharge for HOA projects and split the excess with her under the table. The Walkway project was not the first time they had done it, just the one that got caught because of my lawsuit. With his testimony, Brenda's defense fell apart. She eventually took a plea deal too in May, pleading guilty to theft and official misconduct. She was sentenced to 2 years probation, 300 hours of community service, full restitution to the HOA for the overcharges which totaled nearly $100,000 across multiple projects over 3 years, and a $5,000 fine. She also lost her job. She had worked in pharmaceutical sales, and her company let her go once the conviction became public. Her husband filed for divorce shortly after, which I only knew because it was mentioned in the neighborhood gossip mill. I felt a bit of sympathy for how far she had fallen, but mostly I felt satisfied that there had been real consequences for her actions. Too often, HOA board members abuse their positions with no accountability. This time, at least, justice was served. Life slowly returned to normal. The community moved on from the drama. The new HOA board was professional and respectful, actually following proper procedures and communicating clearly with homeowners. They even updated the covenants to require more stringent oversight for construction projects and clearer rules about easement use. As for me, I settled back into my routine. I still missed Sarah terribly, but the whole ordeal had given me something to focus on besides grief. It reminded me that I was capable of fighting for what was right, even when it was hard. The settlement money went partly to paying off my mortgage and partly into a college fund for my nephew. Brennan only charged me about $20,000 in actual fees, with the rest of his work covered by the contingency arrangement since we won. My garage stood as it always should have, with 3 functional bays and no uninvited pedestrians walking through. I parked my car where I wanted, stored my tools in peace, and enjoyed the privacy that I had fought so hard to preserve. On a warm evening in June, almost a year after the concrete first appeared in my garage bay, I was sitting on my back deck with a beer, watching the sunset. Bill Harrison came over from next door, beer in hand, and joined me. "Beautiful evening," he said, settling into the other deck chair. "Sure is," I agreed. "You know, I was thinking about that whole walkway mess," Bill said. "What you did took guts. A lot of people would have just accepted it or given up when Brenda started threatening fines. I was not going to let them turn my home into a sidewalk," I said simply. "You did everyone a favor. If you had not made a stink, who knows what else she would have gotten away with. The audit found so many problems. She had been running that board like her personal kingdom. "How is the new sidewalk petition going?" I asked, changing the subject. "Actually, got approved last month. Village is putting in sidewalks along that whole stretch of Ridgewood next spring, so eventually people will have their safe walking route, just not through your garage." We both laughed at that. "Think you will ever sell this place?" Bill asked. "I know it has a lot of memories." I thought about it. Sarah and I had bought this house together, picked out every detail. She had died in the master bedroom after hospice care in our final months together. Every room held memories of her, but they were good memories, even the hard ones at the end. "No," I said finally. "This is home. I am not going anywhere," and I meant it. The HOA had tried to take away my peace, my privacy, and my property rights. They had failed. The house was mine, every square foot of it, and I would never let anyone take that away again. Bill raised his beer. "To standing your ground." I clinked my bottle against his. "To standing your ground." We sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, two neighbors who had been through an absurd battle and come out the other side. The community was better for it. The HOA was more accountable. And I had defended what was mine. Sometimes you have to fight for what is right, even when it is difficult, even when people call you selfish or difficult, even when the odds seem stacked against you. Because if you do not stand up for yourself, no one else will. The walkway that the HOA built through my garage bay was gone, removed like it never existed. In its place was just my garage as it should be. The people who wanted the convenient shortcut now had to walk the long way around, nearly 3 miles if they took Ridgewood Boulevard to Park Access Road as most did. Was I responsible for their inconvenience? Technically, yes. Did I feel bad about it? Not even a little bit. They should have thought about that before they built through my property without permission. Every step of that 3-mile walk was a reminder that property rights matter, that rules and procedures exist for a reason, and that homeowners are not subjects to be ruled by an HOA board's whims. I slept well that night and every night after. My house was my castle, my garage was my garage, and the HOA had learned a very expensive lesson about respecting both. The community eventually thrived under better leadership. Property values recovered from the negative publicity of the scandal. New residents moved in, and the story of the walkway became part of neighborhood lore, a cautionary tale told at block parties and community meetings. As for Brenda Patterson, I heard through the grapevine that she eventually moved to another state, Arizona or Nevada, somewhere far from Illinois and the community she had tried to control. Good riddance, I thought when I heard. The neighborhood was better off without her. I continued living my life, working my job in software development, maintaining my house, and slowly building a new routine without Sarah. The grief never fully went away, but it became manageable, a weight I learned to carry rather than one that crushed me. The victory over the HOA gave me confidence in other areas of life. I started dating again, nothing serious, just coffee meetings and occasional dinners. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during Sarah's illness and the grief that followed. I even took up woodworking as a hobby, finally using my garage for projects instead of just parking. Every time I pulled into my driveway and saw all 3 garage bays intact and functional, I smiled. It was a small thing, maybe, in the grand scheme of life, but it was my thing, my property, my rights, my victory, and nobody was walking through it but me. The years ahead would bring their own challenges, I knew. But I had proven to myself that I could fight when necessary, stand my ground when pushed, and win when the cause was just. The HOA had built a walkway through my garage bay, and I had closed it and rerouted them 3 miles around. It was petty in a way, I suppose. but it was also justice. And sometimes, justice feels pretty damn good.